What happens when the kindest person in the restaurant turns out to be the one accused of stealing? If something compels a man to walk away from his polished office, trade his meticulously tailored suit for a faded jacket and a cap pulled low over half his face, then it's certainly not an ordinary matter. For Victor Langley, CEO of Langley's Grill, a restaurant chain spanning 3 states, it took only one anonymous email in his personal inbox to throw off 3 weeks of carefully arranged meetings. The message contained just a single line, no subject, no sender. Your reputation is being sold, right where it all began. And so, without informing a single assistant, Victor quietly returned to the place where 15 years earlier he used to scrub dishes, the very first Langley's Grill location, the birthplace of the food empire he had built from nothing. No one recognized him when the heavy wooden door opened with the familiar jingle of a bell. The name Langley was still on the sign outside, but the air inside had changed beyond recognition. The scent of golden fried onions and the warm laughter of regulars calling each other's names were gone. In their place hung a faint whiff of burnt grease drifting through a haze of smoke, a few vacant stares from employees, and a chill in the atmosphere, despite the unchanged room temperature. Victor took a seat at the far end of the bar counter, the very spot where he used to tally receipts at the end of each shift. He ordered a grilled meat sandwich, the dish that had once been the soul of the diner. His voice was raspy, intentionally lowered to avoid detection. No one asked for his name. No one smiled. Everything passed by like a mechanical routine devoid of emotion. But what struck Victor wasn't the coldness. It was the unsettling silence in the behavior of the staff. He didn't expect things to be the same, but he hadn't imagined the humanity would be gone entirely. When the plate was finally placed in front of him by a young cashier named Tammy, her name tag barely pinned to her wrinkled uniform, Victor didn't eat right away. He watched. And then he saw something curious. At the back of the kitchen stood an old man, silver-haired, frail, his skin creased and weathered, quietly washing dishes. He moved slowly but steadily, as if each motion was a sacred ritual. What stood out was that while other staff rushed by grumbling and snapping at each other, this man, whose apron was as faded as the rag in his hand, never once complained, even when splashed with dirty water. He simply smiled, and whenever a customer passed the open kitchen window, they nodded to him. "Elias!" a child called out, and the old man's eyes lit up as if that child was the only sunshine he needed that day. Victor lowered his fork, a strange tightness building in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but his instincts, honed from years in both kitchens and boardrooms, told him something was wrong. There was a paradox hidden in that kitchen. A good man was being overlooked. And somewhere between the clang of pans and the stench of scorched oil, something unjust was quietly unfolding. Perhaps, after all, that email had not been an exaggeration. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Victor might have found it hard to believe just how stark the contrast could be between people working the same shift. Elias Monroe, the thin, elderly man tucked away in the back corner of the kitchen, was unlike anyone else in that restaurant, not just because of his age, but because of the way he existed. No one barked orders at him, no one rushed him, yet he moved through each task with the quiet precision of someone whose presence carried the rhythm of the entire restaurant. Every dirty dish, every empty coffee cup, was wiped dry with a kind of gentleness that Victor had long believed only lived in memories. But what troubled Victor more than anything was the way the other staff, especially the young cashier Tammy and the tall guy named Reed, treated him. Every time Elias passed the counter to restock clean plates, Tammy would subtly step back, as if the man's mere presence could dirty the air. Reed, slouched against the soda machine, would snicker and glance sideways at Elias like he was just a worn-out shadow taking up space. When Victor quietly asked a young server sneaking bites behind the door about him, the boy just shrugged. "He's been here longer than any of us. They say he used to be a teacher or something. Nobody really cares anymore." Victor frowned. This indifference didn't come from bad people. It came from a culture that had rotted from the inside. And that was what sent a chill down his spine. Lunch service went on. Customers came and went. Victor remained seated in the corner, watching the restaurant operate like a cold machine. Elias stayed the same. He didn't complain, didn't slow down, even helped a waitress catch her balance when she nearly dropped a tray, and no one stopped to thank him. At one point, when a customer accidentally spilled their drink, Elias appeared as if from thin air with a mop in hand, his smile still calm and sincere. Later in the afternoon, a small incident unfolded. A middle-aged man stepped up to the register, reached for his wallet, and then froze, his face flushed with embarrassment. I left my card at home. I might need to come back later." Tammy looked at him like he was an inconvenience. "Then that's what you should do," she replied coldly. But before the man could turn to leave, Elias stepped forward. "Let me take care of it," he said softly but firmly. He pulled a few crumpled bills from his worn shirt pocket and handed them to Tammy, nodding gently at the man. No one said thank you. Reed sighed. "Again? What, is he planning to open a charity with his dishwasher paycheck?" Tammy snorted. "Probably thinks he's some kind of guardian angel. Shame his car's rustier than that old friar." The two of them burst out laughing as Elias turned back to the sink. Victor tightened his grip around his now cold coffee cup. In that moment, he wasn't just witnessing a worker being disrespected. He saw a reflection of his own father, of the quiet men and women who had helped him build Langley's Grill, now buried beneath the polished mask of a system that had forgotten what it meant to honor those who gave quietly. And more than that, he knew. Something worse was brewing beneath the surface. Something the anonymous email had desperately tried to warn him about. As afternoon faded, the sunlight beyond the window grew lazy and fragmented, mirroring the stagnant air inside the diner. Victor remained still at the corner of the counter, his first cup of coffee long replaced by a second, now cold. Not because of time, but because of everything he had witnessed. He didn't take notes, didn't reach for his phone. He simply watched, imprinting every small act into memory, acts that spoke volumes about an entire system. Elias, the elderly man with a hunched back and sinewy hands, kept working without pause. But what caught Victor's attention wasn't just Elias's work ethic, it was the brazen cruelty of the two behind the counter, Tammy and Reed. When a young mother holding a swaddled baby stepped up to pay, Victor sensed what was coming before it even happened. Her face was lovely but tired, her eyes flicking between her child and her wallet, where she counted coins like someone clinging to the last strands of dignity. I'm sorry, I'm $2 short," she said softly, hands trembling as she pulled out loose change. Tammy crossed her arms, already annoyed, about to speak when Reed stepped in, his mouth curling into a smirk like a predator spotting easy prey. "Oh really? I guess you're hoping Elias will cover you, huh?" he said, loud enough for nearby tables to turn and stare. Tammy chimed in, loud and mocking. "Elias, got another charity case for your fund." The diner froze in that awkward, painful silence. Elias, who had been wiping down a table near the back door, heard it and walked over without hesitation. He didn't say much. He opened his wallet just as he always did, worn bills smoothed carefully as though offering an apology for the world's indifference. "It's all right, sweetheart," he said gently. "A meal matters more than money, especially for a little one." The mother couldn't speak, her eyes glassy with tears. The baby reached toward Elias and clutched the edge of his apron, unaware it was touching something sacred. But Reed didn't let the moment settle. He whispered something to Tammy and they both laughed, jotting notes while glancing sideways at Elias. Victor caught fragments of their conversation. Another unpaid tab. "Tell Patricia. No way he can prove anything." It all unfolded in minutes, but it sent a chill down Victor's spine. This wasn't just disregard for an elderly coworker. It was the sign of something calculated, a scheme, something premeditated, hidden behind smirks and apathetic glances. And Elias, so used to staying quiet, had become the easiest target of all. As Elias returned to the sink, Victor noticed him sigh, a soft exhale that carried the crack of aging joints and a flicker of dimmed light in his eyes. Maybe Elias had grown used to being humiliated. Maybe he believed he didn't deserve to be defended. But Victor knew this had gone too far. And if Reed and Tammy really were preparing what Victor feared, he wouldn't let them be the first to act, because justice doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives quietly through the right person standing up at the right moment. And Victor Langley, the CEO who once built everything with bare hands, was ready to stand up again, not just to protect a man, but to save the soul of the very business that bore his name. As the clock behind the counter approached 5 in the afternoon, the atmosphere inside the diner shifted from hurried to hushed. Not the peaceful quiet that follows a long day's work, but the kind of silence strung tight like wire, warning of something looming. Victor could feel it, and he didn't have to wait long to see why. As the crowd thinned, he noticed Tammy and Reed slipping into the dim corner behind the register where the cash drawer and POS system were kept. They leaned in close, voices low and quick, but not quick enough to escape the ears of someone who once studied strategy behind closed boardroom doors. Victor slowly shifted in his seat, pretending to adjust his shoelaces, his ears trained on their words. And then, piece by piece, the scheme began to unfold, as if it wanted to be heard. "I counted. We're short $42 again, same as last time," Tammy muttered, her fingers gliding over a handwritten logbook. Reed nodded, his gaze sharp like a blade. "Perfect. Right on schedule. All you have to do is tell Patricia that the old man was hovering around the drawer while you stepped away." Tammy scoffed. "With his charity act, who wouldn't believe it? I'll just put on a little performance." Reed straightened his collar, whispering with absolute certainty. "Inventories tomorrow. Patricia will have to record the shortage. And if Elias is near the register at the time, all it'll take is a nod from us." A chilling silence passed between them. Then Reed added, voice full of contempt, "Got a cousin who needs a job. Works fast, works quiet, not like that rusty old man." Tammy giggled. "I'm so over customers treating him like a saint." They tapped hands softly. A trap had been set, and the bait was someone completely unaware. Victor's hand tightened around the napkin on his table, each word like a splinter in his ear. He had dealt with liars before, had fired his share of deceitful employees, but he had never witnessed such cruelty planned with such precision, especially not under the name he built with his own hands. What chilled him wasn't just Reed and Tammy's coldness. It was the familiar pattern. Create a problem, pin it on the weakest, then step into their place like the world owed them a promotion. And of all people they could have chosen to frame, they picked Elias, the man who used his own meal money to help customers in need. That night, Victor didn't return to his hotel. He drove out of the lot but didn't leave. His car idled quietly across the street where he had a clear view of the restaurant's side entrance. A little past 9, when most of the staff had gone, Victor saw Elias shuffle out, his shoulders bowed, carrying a small plastic bag. He didn't head toward the main road. Instead, he walked along the tree line behind the restaurant, into the dark, where there were no streetlights, no voices. Victor followed at a distance, quiet as a shadow. At the end of a rutted dirt path behind the commercial strip, among rusted containers and broken pallets, Victor saw it. An old truck, missing its rear window, covered in a worn-out silver tarp. Elias opened the back door, set his bag inside, then climbed into the driver's seat. He didn't turn on the lights, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, in the dark, like a ghost in a city that had forgotten he existed. Victor didn't step out. He didn't knock. He sat in his car, overcome by questions with no answers. How had a man like Elias, so kind, so steady, so giving, ended up living in a broken-down truck? And how could the very system Victor built, supposedly rooted in dignity and community, not even know this man existed? Whose failure was this? Elias's or Victor's? Through the faded glass, Victor watched Elias stare blankly out the windshield. There was no anger in his eyes, no resentment, only quiet endurance. And that, more than anything, was what Victor could not forgive. Not Reed, not Tammy, and not himself. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just return. He would act, not with power, but with truth. Victor woke early the next morning, not to the sound of an alarm, but from a restless night, one with no dreams, only a slow, grinding sense of guilt. He had faced many corporate crises before, financial losses, media scandals, even a food safety incident. But never had a situation made him feel so deeply that he had failed as a human being. That morning, he didn't wear his usual attire. The faded flannel shirt, the old baseball cap, and dark sunglasses returned, not to hide his identity, but to allow him to observe one last time before turning everything inside out. He entered the diner mid-morning when the flow of operations had settled into autopilot and employees began to move with mechanical rhythm. Tammy and Reed were both on shift, and Victor noticed that they no longer looked at Elias with disdain. Instead, their eyes avoided him entirely. Perhaps they sensed something approaching, like animals catching the scent of a coming storm. Patricia, the shift manager, was in her office, the door slightly ajar. Victor knew today was the scheduled register audit, and Reed's cruelly calculated plan to frame Elias would soon be put into action. But first, Victor had something else to do. He placed a food order under a fake name Tammy didn't bother to remember, then sat at his usual corner table with a folded newspaper, just a cover to mask his attention. For nearly an hour, he listened in silence until he heard exactly what he needed. Reed and Tammy whispering again, this time coordinating the perfect moment to stage the discovery of missing money, right after a customer failed to pay and Elias happened to be near the cash register. Victor took a sip of his coffee, rose quietly, and left the restaurant. He didn't go far, just returned to his car and pulled out his phone to call one of the few people he still trusted in the company, Ivy Leclerc, head of internal communications and crisis management. She had once helped him contain a major scandal 3 years earlier. But this time, Victor wasn't asking for advice. He needed a plan of action. We need cameras, audio, witnesses, and a story strong enough to force the whole system to face itself, he said. And Ivy, this time I don't just want to remove 2 names from the payroll. I want to change the bloodstream of Langley's Grill. By late afternoon, Victor returned to the restaurant. He sat in the same seat at the height of the dinner rush. Elias was still there, working steadily, though Victor noticed a small bandage on his wrist, likely from a burn caused by the dishwashing unit. Still, Elias didn't complain. Not once. And that was when Victor realized something deeper. Elias wasn't just a victim in this story. He was a reminder that even within the cold corridors of a broken system, there are still people quietly holding on to whatever warmth remains. And while Reed and Tammy prepared to step into the final phase of their scheme, Victor was just as ready for the greatest performance of his life. Friday evening, Langley's Grill filled up fast around 5:30 as families wrapped up their workday, student groups poured in, and regulars filed through the doors for dinner. It was the golden hour, the busiest time of day, and also the exact moment Reed and Tammy chose to execute their plan. What they didn't know was that they were the ones walking into a trap much bigger than they could imagine. Victor sat in his usual spot near the window, coffee in hand as always, eyes following every movement in the room. But today he wasn't alone. Tucked discreetly near the register, Ivy sat pretending to type on her laptop, her gaze steady through specially equipped glasses embedded with a recording camera, streaming everything live. The internal security team at Langley's had placed hidden microphones around the kitchen and register station the night before, carefully concealed, far beyond what Reed or Tammy could ever detect. At 5:45, a woman entered the diner with a little girl about 5 years old, both neatly dressed but clearly weathered by hard times. She was the final piece in Victor's plan, a real mother, Jessica Miller, whom he'd quietly connected with through the Langley Foundation's Community Assistance Program. The little girl was Lily, her daughter. Victor hadn't asked Jessica to act. He simply asked her to do what struggling mothers do every day, be honest. Jessica ordered a sandwich for Lily and a small bowl of soup for herself. She paid in cash, then paused. I'm sorry, I thought I had enough, she said quietly, pulling out a few more coins, still short $15. Tammy stared at her for a beat, then gave a thin smile. Oh, don't worry, she said loudly, intentionally. We have an in-house charity fund. Elias, looks like we've got another one for your donations. The diner fell into an awkward hush. Jessica dropped her gaze and Lily whispered, asking why everyone was staring at them. Victor felt every muscle in his body tighten with fury, but he held his composure. Elias emerged from his kitchen, dishwater still clinging to his sleeves. Without a word, he opened his wallet, took out a carefully folded $20 bill and handed it to Tammy with the grace of someone giving, not out of pity, but out of quiet dignity. Thank you, Jessica murmured, cradling her daughter. It's all right, Elias said gently, then knelt to Lily's level. Do you like to draw? She nodded. Elias pulled a worn crayon from his pocket and placed it in her hand. Reed glanced at his watch. 6:02. He strode toward Patricia, the shift manager who was doing inventory near the kitchen. Patricia, he said gravely, I just checked the drawer. We're short $20. Right after, he was near the register. Tammy joined quickly, feigning concern. I saw it too. I was busy at the time, but Elias was near the cash drawer and he looked at it. Patricia's brows drew together, suspicion starting to take hold. We need to look into this immediately. Victor stood. He stepped into the middle of the restaurant, pulled off his cap, removed his glasses, and shed the worn jacket, revealing a crisp dress shirt and the subtle embroidery of the Langley's logo. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, a young employee near the kitchen whispered, "Oh my God, it's him." Victor Langley, the founder, the man most of them had only seen in news articles and corporate videos, was standing in front of them. His voice rang out, calm but resolute. "I think it's time we take a closer look at the truth." In the moment Victor began to speak, the entire restaurant seemed to freeze in time. Forks hung suspended midair, diners sat motionless, staff stood staring. Patricia, the shift manager, looked at Victor in disbelief, then turned to Reed and Tammy as if silently asking whether this was all just a dream. But no one was dreaming. Victor Langley, the founder, the symbol, the man once featured on the cover of Forbes for building a restaurant empire from scratch, was now standing in the middle of this small diner, the very place where a scheme had just been carried out less than 5 minutes ago. Victor needed no microphone. His voice carried with calm authority, firm and steady, yet cold enough that every word landed deep. "I've been here for 3 days, sitting right over there. I've watched everything, both the quiet acts of dignity and the bold strokes of betrayal." He turned directly to Tammy. "I heard you call Elias's name like it was a joke." Then to Reed. "I heard you plot, frame, and prepare to replace a man neither of you is worthy to clean the shoes of." Patricia stepped forward hesitantly. "Mr. Langley, is this really—" Victor nodded, then reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. He handed it to Ivy, who had been posing as a customer, and she stood, walking toward the kitchen. Within seconds, the TV above the counter, usually looping menu items, switched to live footage from the hidden surveillance installed the day before. Reed's voice echoed across the room. "We just need to help the numbers not match one more time. Elias will become the problem." Then Tammy's voice laced with a bitter laugh. "Who's gonna believe some old guy living in a rusty truck shoving bills into the register like an idiot?" Silence gripped the room. The next clip showed Elias gently placing money into the register, quietly washing trays, wiping tables, covering for his co-workers, handing out his own cash to help a struggling customer. All without seeking recognition, without waiting for thanks. Patricia turned to Reed and Tammy, her voice shaking. You lied to me." Reed opened his mouth to speak, but Victor raised a hand, cutting him off. "Enough. We've already submitted the footage and all supporting evidence to our legal team. The police have been briefed on this case of internal fraud. You will both be investigated not just for theft, but for abuse of authority and harassment of a senior employee." At that moment, 2 Langley's uniformed security officers entered quietly through the back door. They said nothing. They simply took position beside Tammy and Reed, as if everything had already been decided. Tammy burst into tears, collapsing into sobs once she realized there was no way out. Reed tried to hold his composure, but the vein pulsing in his temple betrayed him. Victor no longer looked at them. He turned toward Elias, who had stood quietly near the back of the kitchen the whole time, never speaking, never stepping forward. He did not raise his head. He did not flinch. Still the same man, still clothed in silent humility. "Elias," Victor stepped toward him, his voice softening, "I owe you an apology. Not just for today, but for allowing a system that should have protected people like you to grow blind and warped. I hope you'll give me the chance to make it right." The entire restaurant erupted in applause. Some people stood, others wiped away tears. Elias only bowed his head slightly, his eyes red but his smile intact. "I never needed an apology. I only hoped things would get better for those who come after me." Victor nodded, and with the solemnity of a man owning his failures, he declared, "Starting tomorrow, Elias Monroe will be the honorary manager of this location, and this is just the beginning." The next morning, as the sun rose over the worn rooftops of the neighborhood where Langley's Grill stood, a quiet but profound transformation began to unfold. Unlike the usual gloom, today the staff arrived earlier than normal. Eyes that had been hesitant just a day before now shimmered with curiosity. Aprons were tied tighter. The front windows were polished to a shine, reflecting the morning light. They didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but they could feel it. Something had truly shifted the moment Victor Langley stepped into the center of the diner and called the truth by its name. Elias arrived on time as always, not early, not late, still wearing his old ash-gray jacket and the shoes worn down at the heels. But today, He didn't come in through the side door as he usually did. A security guard, present for the first time at this branch, approached him respectfully, bowed slightly, and said, "Mr. Langley is waiting for you in your new office." Elias blinked, confused, but followed. A new office? In 7 years of working here, he had never once stepped into the manager's office. He didn't even know if it had a desk. When the door opened, Elias stopped in his tracks. The small room, once an unused cold storage unit, had been transformed. A bright, clean workspace with a brand new desk, a wall-mounted employee schedule, a modern computer setup, and on the desk, a file folder with his name on it. Victor stood waiting, not in a suit, but in a simple white shirt and a dark sweater. But his eyes no longer held the gaze of a CEO. They held the look of a student finally recognizing the one who had taught him the most valuable lesson of all. "Elias," Victor said, "this isn't a reward. This is a recognition." He gently slid the folder toward him. "Starting today, you are the honorary manager of this location, with full authority over daily operations and cultural training. New salary, full benefits, flexible hours, and..." Victor paused for a moment. "No more sleeping in your truck." He reached into the cabinet and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was a lease contract for a small apartment near the city center. "We've prepaid 2 years of rent. This is your home. Not temporary housing, not a gift. A place you deserve." Elias's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, hardly believing what he saw. "But I don't have a degree. I've never managed anyone in my life." Victor smiled, his eyes misting. "You don't need to learn how to lead. You've been leading all along. Every time you helped a customer short on money, every time you took the blame for someone else's mistake, every time you kept silent instead of complaining, you were doing what none of us had the courage to do. You held on to humanity in a system that had forgotten its soul." That day, the restaurant didn't reopen with banners or discount campaigns. It reopened with a single notice taped to the front window, simple but weighty in meaning. "Starting today, Langley's Grill adopts a new employee policy, a living wage, emergency assistance for staff in hardship, and the creation of the Elias Monroe Fund to support those who are trying to live with kindness in a world too often indifferent." Customers came not for the food, but to meet the elderly dishwasher who had once helped them without asking for thanks. Jessica returned with little Lily and handed Elias a new box of crayons. A college student, once helped by Elias when he couldn't afford a coffee during finals week, brought him a hand-knit scarf from his mother. Everyone wanted to give something back. Elias stood silently, his hand resting on the new plaque above the counter. "Honorary Manager, Elias Monroe." He said nothing, but everyone saw it. His eyes, for the first time, no longer carried the weight of a man bracing against the world. They were the eyes of someone finally allowed to live. 3 weeks after the day the truth was revealed and change began to take root, the first and once forgotten Langley's Grill location had quietly become the center of something far greater than food. No longer just a diner, it now stood as a living symbol of restoration, of human dignity, and of how a system can transform when it chooses to listen to the quiet sighs of the unseen. Victor Langley kept his promise. He didn't retreat to his executive office. Instead, once a week, he visited a different location, not as the boss, but as a colleague willing to roll up his sleeves to wash dishes, wipe down tables, or listen to an employee talk about their baby's first tooth. But without fail, he always spent the most time at the branch where Elias Monroe served as honorary manager. Elias remained the same, still arriving early, still enjoying a grilled cheese sandwich and a hot black coffee before opening hours. But now, instead of sitting behind the dish pit with wet hands, he sat at a window-side table, the very spot where a man in a flannel shirt had once quietly observed him. From there, he started each day, not with commands, but with a simple question: "How are you feeling today?" New employees weren't just trained on the POS system or table service protocol. They attended Elias class, where he taught them how to smile even with an aching back, how to notice a confused customer, and how to understand that kindness doesn't slow us down. It makes everything fall into place. The Elias Monroe Fund, established by Victor and embraced by the community, had already issued its first rounds of support, A cook recovering from illness received help with hospital bills, a single mother could now afford a nearby school for her child, and a student once helped by Elias when short on lunch money was now granted an official internship scholarship at Langley's. The story spread. Some headlines called it the tale of a disguised CEO, but Victor refused interviews that focused on himself. "If you're going to tell the story, tell it about Elias," he said. "I was just someone who listened in time." One Saturday morning, Victor and Elias sat together in the corner of the restaurant, golden light pouring through the window. Victor asked, "Have you ever thought about retiring?" Elias chuckled, sipped his coffee, and gently shook his head. "I've retired plenty of times. Retired from hope, retired from dreaming. But then someone told me I still mattered. How could I walk away from a place where every day someone lives a little better because of something small I did?" Victor said nothing. He knew that in a world full of cold systems, one person like Elias is enough to wake up a whole network of values that had been asleep for too long. And at Langley's Grill, from that day on, no one ever saw wiping tables, washing dishes, or checking in on a customer as something insignificant. Because they had witnessed how those very things could change a person, a community, and even a leader who had forgotten how to listen. Outside, the rain began to fall softly. Elias stood, slipped on his raincoat, and prepared to head into the kitchen for the lunch shift. Before he left, he placed a hand on Victor's shoulder and smiled gently. "Watch the place for a few minutes, boss." Victor nodded, hands wrapped around his coffee, eyes following the old man's figure disappearing behind the swinging door. An honorary manager reporting for duty like it was any other day, not to be thanked, not to be noticed, but to continue doing the right thing, quietly and completely. Because when you believe that kindness needs no permission to take root, one day, without warning, it will bloom in the most unexpected places. A system is only truly strong when it knows how to honor the quiet individuals who protect its core values. The story of Elias reminds us that kindness doesn't need to be loud, but it always leaves the deepest mark. If you believe that justice begins with the smallest acts, then like this video, subscribe to the channel to help us share more stories that inspire, and don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase "live kindly" so we know you feel the same.